Hello, my name is Tolg and I exist, therefore I think too much. I'm going to be reading Marguerite, Porete, The Mirror of Simple Souls, the introduction, because I am confusing and I am confused. I've stated before that I do not like the introduction. I have also stated in the last video, I don't remember why. The reason I am like 30 chapters in or something and reading the introduction now is because you misquoted the year 1300 for 1100 and started doing that repeatedly. And then someone made a point to say that she was not a Beguine nun, which the preface, was it the preface or the beginning of the introduction? One of them decided to go into detail of what a Beguine nun is more than, my confused state would allow me to do. Therein, it was probably needed to read this, and I am doing it late for that reason. So I won't be reading it all the way through. It's too long for that. And therein, last one was part 1. This one will be part 2. And I cuss. And if you don't like cussing, you can go away. I am beholden on to no one. So, we left off where Sir William, I don't know if he's a sir, actually. There's a guy named William. And he is against the Beguines because he seems to be an ass. I don't think they gave him a better description than that. He's, what do they call it? A bigot. And he's used his bigotry as a means of attacking the Beguine nuns because why not attack women? Historically, it seems like the best plan of action. So, also that's sarcasm. I'm bad at it, but I hope you picked up on that. So yeah, it left off describing the relationship between the Dominicans being the priests, the Dominican sect of priests, who were responsible for the sect of Beguine nuns that I assume Marguerite Porete was a part of. Otherwise, I'm not sure why this would be referenced. And therein it starts, William of St. Omer is only one example of rising public suspicion about the Beguines. The dangers and problems attendant to the Beguine way of life were recognized by detractors, ecclesiastical authorities, and the Beguines themselves. The implementation of ecclesiastical regulations was frustrated because there was no unanimous agreement as to who should have the responsibility for oversight and pastoral care of the Beguines. On the one hand, the parish clergy claimed authority for the guidance and care of Beguines as their parishioners. On the other hand, the Beguines, attempting to avoid being bound to the parish, allowed themselves to be given special privileges. How did they allow themselves that? From papal legates, or attached themselves to a wealthy founder. Many Beguines tried to place themselves under the pastoral care of the mendicant orders. From the start, Beguines felt free to confess to the mendicants, and they made use of this possibility to such a great extent that the mendicants were widely employed as special confessors for the Beguines. Officially, the leadership of the orders had expressly forbidden their members to administer the sacraments of communion and extreme unction to Beguines, and to undertake their pastoral care. They neither arranged for the relationships which emerged between the Beguines and the Franciscans and the Dominicans, nor were they favorably disposed toward these relationships, but they seemed to be unable to do anything about it. The Beguines themselves preferred the Franciscans and Dominicans to parish clergy and often settled near mendicant houses where individual members of the orders made themselves available for the guidance of Beguine communities. In the latter part of the 13th century, bishops and/or founders gave oversight and pastoral care of Beguines to the mendicants, although general authority remained with the parish clergy. The confusion about how to order the Beguine life becomes even more clear in light of the decisions of the Second Council of Lyons in 1274, which was guided by the decrees of the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. The Fourth Lateran Council under Innocent the Third. That's a name. Someone named a kid Innocent. I have a feeling they were not innocent. The third expressed a strong reaction against the proliferation of new monastic orders in the wake of the apostolic life movement, declaring that any new religious groups had to order themselves according to an already existing established rule, instead of submitting a new rule for approval. In effect, no new orders could be established. The Second Council of Lyons reiterated the prohibition of the Fourth Lateran Council that no new orders be established. The declaration included a supplementary statement that any new orders founded since 1215 without papal approval were forbidden and dissolved. Doubtless the Beguines were meant, and the council must have believed, that with this proclamation the dangers and disgraces of the Beguines could be erased. So fucking cute. I'm looking at my cat. I think it should be said here, not that I believe anybody to not understand this, but mostly because I needed to remind myself mentally there for a second. In the US, we have become very accustomed to freedom of religion, but during this time, it was fair to understand that with the changing of the king and or the queen would also be the changing of religion. Whichever king came to power, and whatever religion they praised was the religion that also simultaneously came to power. I think that was mostly prominent in Europe. I don't know how Europe, as though that's not inclusive of where the papacy is in France and all that, Italy, but mostly Britain, the British Empire. I want to say that was also Scotland, maybe, and I'm not entirely sure how that visited itself in France, if France had an ounce of freedom, or because I do know that the French king played court, allowed for the Beguine nuns to have a béguinage of their own in France, where they were able to be quite on their own, beholden onto themselves economically, not reliant on other people's outside of themselves. And also that same French king was in a territorial dispute with the papacy. So, where this says in 1215 any order was not to be allowed, has to be specifically in the territory that was given to the Pope, to the Catholic Church, which is another thing. They own land. And for centuries had been trying to be their own country. And the Swiss army is said to be the army of the Pope, if that's not widely understood, which would be, the military of that country. So, that is the allowing and the not allowing. I don't think it extends past the land they own into other countries, hence the béguinage in France. I hate the way I say France. France. So going forward. In Grundmann's view, the council was ignorant of the fact that the Beguine way had evolved into two basic forms so that no general overall order for all Beguines could be implemented. On the one hand, there were Beguines, by far the majority, who led a stable life in Beguine houses, in many cases in close connection with the mendicant orders, supporting themselves with their incomes or with the work of their hands. On the other hand, there were the few who triggered the complaints that the Beguines remained in no cloister, but wandered without discipline, living My cat distracted me. Living off alms instead of working. Such a separation became, as Grundmann sees it, of disastrous significance for the later history of the Beguines. The lack of organizational distinctions between the two groups made the measures against the unregulated wandering Beguines unworkable, because the same name, for so vastly different outward forms of life, had mixed the regulated innocent Beguines into the catastrophe. Grundmann closes his discussion of the Beguines by noting that local statutes, which committed the Beguine communities to a kind of enclosure, were neither uniformly nor completely carried out. There were religious women who remained outside the Beguine communities, wandering and begging. These solitary Beguines, according to Grundmann, became adherents of the heresy of the Free Spirit. Since both groups were called Beguines, the repression of the Free Spirit put all Beguines in danger, orthodox as well as heretical. Also, for the time, I am very certain, but not able to swear on it, that women were still seen as property of the men in the house, presumably the father, and then whomever you married, and then after that, any male heir to whichever family existed. And if you were of lower class, lower standing in society, then if there was not someone you were married to, and if there was no father to uphold or family to take care of, then, you were to the poorhouse. So being a nun was a means of avoiding essentially the poorhouse or homelessness or prostitution. And Beguine, as it's described, is just the sentiment of being spiritual without having a specific classification. And like it said, I guess that whole paragraph stating that the issue was that they subsisted off of socialism, off of alms from the public, rather than making their own money, and therein that made them not innocent, wherein the ones who did make their own money and economically supported themselves were seen as innocent and acceptable by the public. As much as I understand it, saying all this, being a Beguine nun was a means of just economic reprieve, not having to answer to a man, lock the man down with the system. Sorry. The growing suspicion led to a major attack on Beguines with 2 decrees from the ecumenical Council of Vienna, held from 1311 to 1312. These decrees, far from clarifying the situation for Beguines and ecclesiastical authorities, only contributed to the confusion and had dire consequences for the women. One decree, oh my god, it is in French, cum de quibusdam mulieribus. That has to be Latin. Explicitly condemned the status of Beguine, citing Beguines as being in violation of the Fourth Lateran ban on new orders. The condemnation also included a very general judgment concerning doctrinal aberrations of the Beguines, terming their theological attempts as madness. Much madness to the discerning eye. Quoting a poem from Emily Dickinson. The decree maintained the confusion about Beguines. However, for the document closed with an escape clause, which conceded that truly pious women might be allowed to live penitently, with or without vows of chastity in communal houses. With or without vows of chastity is like, hey, we're getting a lot from these nuns, and we want to still get them. So the ones that we consider pious will be able to fuck. That's exactly what the fuck that sounds like. That is exactly what the fuck that sounds like. And that is also probably why the majority of this book, The Mirror of Simple Souls, is spent with her saying, no, if you argue against me, you are in fact arguing against God. I had thought that she was fighting against, specific priests. But it would seem that she was also making a case for just simply her piety. And therein, the piety subsists on godliness, obviously, but, you argue against me, you're arguing against God. Anything you say against me, you're saying against God. Makes more sense now, knowing that they were attempting to split hairs, which women can remain economically reliant on alms and themselves versus which ones have to go to the poorhouse or prostitute. That is exactly what is happening here. Where am I? The decree gave no criteria as to how one was to make the distinction between those who were to be suppressed and those who were to be protected. If the distinction was between the solitary itinerant beguines and the stable women in community, the document did not say so. Yeah, that's their loophole. It's whomever they want to fuck. The other decree, ad nostrum, was concerned with doctrine and listed 8 errors of, quote, an abominable sect of malignant men known as begards and faithless women known as beguines, unquote. Abominable. Church really hated these people, which have been generally considered to be the fundamental tenets of the heresy of the Free Spirit. The articles of Ad Nostrum accused these heretics of claiming that they could attain such perfection in the present life that they were incapable of sin. What did they say? The pendulum swings both ways. So if you have religion teaching for thousands of years now that, at least 1,000, that original sin is being born, and you can do nothing but sin as being human, then logically the pendulum would swing the other way with humans saying there is no sin and I cannot sin. I'm not saying I see either point, either which way. I have no pony in the horse. No horse in the race. Pony in the race? Yeah. My pony does not exist inside of a horse. The articles of Ad Nostrum accused these heretics of claiming that they could attain such, I already read that, In addition, because of this supposed perfection, the Vienna Articles charged that these heretics claimed they were not subject to obedience to human laws or to the laws of the Church. Anarchy. In effect, the Free Spirit heretics were accused of a radical mysticism and antinomianism. Okay. It is important to note that if the first decree perpetuated confusion by offering no criterion by which to discern the quote-unquote good beguines from the quote-unquote bad, the second decree, in catastrophic fashion, identified beguines and their male counterparts, begards, as one organized heretical sect, namely the heretics of the Free Spirit. The Vienna Decree Ad Nostrum used beguine as a technical term for adherents of the Free Spirit heresy, as if beguines were by definition heretical. The failure of the Council to develop a workable distinction between pious and impious beguines and its legal definition of beguine as an adherent of the Free Spirit heresy resulted in what was tantamount to, quote, 100 years war, unquote, against beguines and begards in Germany, ending with the Council of Constance in 1417. Many women lost their lives to inquisitorial condemnation. On the other hand, many beguines were protected from inquisitors by advocates from the mendicant orders, by bishops, and by civil magistrates. The threat to Beguine communities came not from the poor reputation and heretical tendency of the solitary Beguines, as Grundmann argued, but from the inherent ambiguity of the decrees from the Council of Vienna. One of my favorite books is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Bronte? And there is a crazy person named Joseph, the farmhand. And he has this, the guy who moves in, from whom the perspective is initially in writing. Wow, I am doing well. He has a dream. And it's because of the crazy farmhand Joseph, who goes on about, the sinners and how not to sin. This makes me think that that arose from this, unless the pattern persists that just people, go on witch hunts, either quote unquote or absolutely exactly what that is. Tribalism. You are not us, so you must be othered, and in being othered, human nature is violent. That pattern persists and looks pretty much the same no matter which title it's given onto. End rant. The Beguine free spirit ambiguity becomes even more apparent in the important work by Robert E. Lerner. Through meticulous research and analysis, he has determined that the data do not support the assumptions of ad nostrum. He found that the Free Spirits were not a sect in the sense of an organization with institutionalized forms of practice and government in communication with other adherents. Instead, they were individuals who held Free Spirit doctrines and who did not form like-minded groups in any formalized way. Much like the US is very much against Antifa right now, where it's just, hey, I don't like fascists, is literally what Antifa is, anti-fascism. But, people of lower IQ have a tendency to hear Antifa and say it is a physical group and they are organized. It's wild that pattern also persists of the incredible lack of logic. Not all free spirits were Beguines and Begards. The heresy was found mainly in urban centers and middle-sized towns. While statistics are not available, the evidence for free spirits suggests to Lerner that they were from the more prosperous classes in that they were literate. Yeah. A near monopoly of the well-off. Lerner notes that some of the heretics found in the sources were authors, and those that were not writers could still read. Many had a well-developed theological vocabulary. They were not school-trained Latinists, however, which would account for the negative judgment of these persons as unlearned idiots. That's harsh for 1200 AD. 1300 AD, that is harsh as fuck. These people can read. And for their time, I give this book a lot of holy shit. The introduction is long. A lot of shit. I give Marguerite Porete a lot of shit for her inability to stand by what she proposes. Make a point and then stand by it. However, again, for 1200, 1300 AD, and especially for being a woman of that time, she is highly learned. And it would indicate, like it says, near monopoly of the well-off, it would indicate that these people were of the higher class, which were the ones most affected when a monarch would change religion. And the free spirits were committed to poverty and mendicancy as an outgrowth of the Vita Apostolica movement. The centerpiece of the free spirit perspective seems to be that arduous ascetic practice was necessary to attain the divine life of union with God. Sounds very much like Buddhism. No, is it Taoism? Yeah, the people who wear orange robes to oversimplify it and sound kind of shitheaded about it. Monks. The practice of being a monk, where in order to practice asceticism, you go out to do a good deed for someone and they pay you with a meal and that's how you eat. This is just taking place on a different continent, or rather on a different country, in a different country. So same end goal, different routes. In this view, only through extreme purgation could one divest the self of all will and desire in order to attain perfection. Yeah, that would be how you would do it. Not exist. The motivation for the free spirits was the search for spiritual perfection, not a revolutionary antipathy to the church, as some scholars have thought. The church is militaristic control, so it would be antipathy. It would be, I don't need to be controlled by you because I'm doing it on my own. Look, ma, no hands. Lerner's work shows that those independent Beguines who were free spirits were mostly educated and literate, and therefore presumably from wealthier backgrounds. Such evidence would indicate that the solitary, itinerant, begging Beguines probably chose their mode of life as a continuation of the apostolic ideal, in which case their mendicancy would have religious and not merely economic significance. Not every solitary Beguine was a free spirit, but they were all suspected of being such. As Lerner shows, the evidence from the protocols indicates that such women were viewed as heretical probably because they were solitaries, and because they were visible and did not conform to the prescribed order. Again, according to Lerner's findings, not all female free spirits were Beguines. Some were lay women who had been disciples of male free spirit teachers. Also, some Beguine free spirits belonged to a community and therefore were not the independents who were led into the heresy, as Grundmann supposed. These considerations indicate that generalizations are hard to come by in the study of both the Beguines and the adherents of free spirit ideas. The free spirit heresy is related to the Beguines, but not so clearly as was supposed either by the Council of Vienna or later scholarship. What is clear, however, is that economic and social issues do not define the limits for the discussion of the Beguine movement, nor does the study of Beguines exhaust our understanding about the contours of the free spirit heresy. Contours. Interesting way of saying that. I have a question, which I could Google, but given, current politics in the US, I'm not sure I'd be able to find it on Google. What economic suffering was Germany going through in the years 1200 to 1300 that the upper class would hate themselves? Much like the US is currently going through with this economic upheaval after the stock market crash in the 90s, early 2000s. Was it another pattern of eat the rich? That is where I am going to end this one this time. I did not get far, much like I predicted I wouldn't. And I talk too much. C'est la vie. So, I don't think this clarified anything. Good night.